Well, hello there. In this video, Oscar winner Roger Christian discusses his role as a real-life Jawa scavenging to bring some of the most iconic sets and props to life on the original Star Wars film. But first, my friends at FanHome have been in touch again. It's like borderline harassment now, but how could I resist this? A chance to bring another iconic movie prop to life. The Infinity Gauntlet from the MCU, used by Thanos for Mad Titan himself to harness the power of the Infinity Stones. I'm looking forward to building my own officially licensed kit, and you can too by checking out the link in the description. I know from past experience with FanHome that assembly will be easy to follow even for an idiot like me, and the quality will be top notch. Click the link for more. Now on to Roger, who reflected on his role as set director for, at the time, a little known low budget science fiction film called Star Wars.
Fox greenlit the movie on December the 22nd. We moved into the studio on January the 6th, and they were shooting in the end of March. Now, that's 2.5 months prep of a movie this side. What any science fiction movie has a year prep. It was such a scramble. There was no way to make anything. I just had to find objects and come up with crazy ideas that because George was an independent director and had made THX, he embraced. Otherwise, anything I suggested, like buying airplane scrap from junkyards that was cheap and making the sets out of it, I would have been fired by any American normal director. But it was embraced and we got it made.
You were essentially, I suppose, a real-life Jawa. You were scavenging for parts to create these props. Am I right in saying Luke's binoculars? You used super glue, second-hand cameras. I don't think for the binoculars, but other found objects included Pacific Island war clubs, medieval axes, which really don't sound sci-fi.
No, and that was, the first thing I did was I went to the gun hire place, got a Sterling submachine gun, got some T-strip, stuck it around the handle, and found some old sights from the army from Ireland and stuck those on the top. And then I thought, you know what, George has always said, Han Solo, wow, he's a Western gunslinger. So I found this Mauser, the German gun, that to me was a sci-fi equivalent of an amazing gun. It had a wooden stock. I did the same thing. I added some sights on it, a few bits and pieces, and then I didn't tell anyone. I called George and John Barry over to the gun hire place and said, come and have a look. That was my test if I'm on the right path or not. George embraced it, and he stayed with me and got his fingers covered in super glue, and we made Princess Leia's gun there out of another one. So that way I could rent as many guns as I wanted. That the one, as you said, the Tusken Raiders, I was digging around and I thought, we've got these sophisticated weapons, if you like, for the Death Star and for other people. I need an old kind of African warriors weapon that they would have found. And I found this Tokyo Warriors Club, which is just struck me as such a beautiful object. And then I thought, well, I got to change it. I can't just have it. So I got a medieval mace, drilled out the top, put it in. And that's the only one that was in the movie. We kept repairing it, using it over and over again. And, it's become an icon because Boba Fett now used it to battle the stormtroopers on his re-arrival in The Mandalorian. All of those things, even Chewbacca's crossbow, I found this wonderful crossbow with balls on the end, and I never saw that as a crossbow. I thought, wow, I'm going to add some sights on this and show George, and he changed the script because Ralph McQuarrie's first painting had him with a more conventional weapon.
Wow.
But there's something about these objects that are designed for a purpose, and then if I could see beyond that here was something I could adapt. I guess the most famous is the lightsaber. It was a battery pack that went on a flash gun, but when I saw it, I thought, this is such a beautiful object, and it has a mystical quality about it. You don't know what it is. So sticking the same T-strip that I use for the blasters around it, and sticking a bit of old, I'd broken down a Texas Instruments calculator and found the bubble strip which illuminated the numbers and made them a little bit larger to see. And I stuck that in the grip, and there it was with the D-ring on the end. There's the lightsaber.
One of the most, soon to become one of the most iconic weapons in a movie history. Just
Apparently.
like that. You make it sound so easy. And we're still seeing that original lightsaber, the one that in Star Wars 77 release that we see Obi-Wan hand to Luke. We're still seeing that design, your design creation cropping up today. The Obi-Wan Kenobi series recently on Disney Plus, you know,
Yes.
you got a glimpse of that saber.
Yes.
In the desert, buried deep beneath. You know, we're still talking about it now, all these years later. Can you get used to that at all, ever?
No, I was so proud of this movie. I mean, not just because of what we did, but I was proud of George for sticking to it. You know, when there's no secret now, there was like 5 of us on this set who were friends with George and who stuck with him. And when the rest of the crew just thought it was a job and a load of rubbish that would really never get released, it was a children's fairy story. Well, that's the point of it. Star Wars has given a planet something to believe in. You know, where good does triumph over evil, and I'm very supportive of it. So I just embrace it all the time and think, yes, this is, you know, not for ego, not because of what we did, but because we need it in this world. It's so troubled. You need those legends to help us. And I think that's very important.
When there was all this lack of belief around you making that original movie, and you were one of the few that did believe that this was something more, did the lack of belief around you though ever start to get you down? Did doubt start to creep into your mind at all?
It was very difficult, but I've always been stubborn since I was 2 years old. I've always had a belief in you have to follow your path. And you know, I tell the story in the documentary, and it's true. I first up, when we were in Lee Studios, before it started, I'd made all the guns, I'd made all the weapons, I'd collected together a lot of stuff. We made a speeder out of wheelbarrow wheels that the carpenter had at home to get the size right of Luke's land speeder. All of this went into the studios, and you know, people looking at it thought, what is this? You know, this rubbish and stuff, that these aren't sci-fi guns. They asked me, and they put out a whole table and put all the weapons I'd made and approved, and these were ready and what George wanted. They came in, the first AD, the props on the floor, all of them came, looked at it, picked up my blaster for the stormtroopers, threw it at me, literally, and said, this is absolute crap. We're doing a sci-fi movie. Don't you understand? For a Hollywood director. And they went off to try to get me fired. And that's how it started. But I just thought, okay, well, that's how it's going to be. So like George and like John Barry, we just got our heads down and got on with it. And I didn't listen. I felt bad for George every day watching the way that he was disrespected. But we decided to stick by his side and make his movie for him. And because I loved it, I loved every day of it. I was, you know, having no sleep. I was working 7 days a week under huge pressure, but being in Tunisia, seeing what was coming, seeing the rushes, seeing what I knew he would do with it with sound, you know, we stuck with it.
Do you think in some ways this negativity, the budget limitations, do you think that went in the movie's favor, in the sense that you said yourself that you're stubborn, you became the underdogs? Do you think it actually helped produce what some might say became a miracle?
I do, yeah. There's, you know, we often debate this, well, if you'd had all the budget and you did everything and got it all made, would it be any different? But I think there's a kind of, you know, look at the spaghetti westerns. I mean, you know, they had all the money in the world in America and they made these huge westerns. But what do we all remember is Sergio Leone's $1 million budgeted efforts he made in Spain. Because they seem much more true. They were grittier and earthier, and I think you know, sometimes those limitations, when you're pushed to the wall, they do. It's what I call it. It seeps into the DNA of the movie. It's in every frame, and there's a rough kind of Western quality to Tunisia that we instead of designing everything of Tatooine, we used ancient architecture that's been there for centuries and had a really otherworldly appeal to it. And all you had to do was put a few panels in there and imagine underneath the surface there's a lot of technology going on. So I think, you know, that certainly, and there was no CGI then, so everything you see is absolutely real, apart from the you know, the model shooting that they had to do. But most of that's with model shoots, and there's no secret. There's accidents that happen, bits of dust or a light change or something happens. It all comes down to an audience believing what they're seeing. And if they can connect to that, and this was the first science fiction film that ever connected to an audience. And I think that limitation did, yes, I think it really helped. I think that somehow that struggle, that kind of, you know, and George was very focused. He just had to get his film made. That's all he could do. And, you know, again, it's well known. I mean, the stress put him in hospital at the end of it. They thought it was so, he was ill, but it was stress. But he always stuck to his ideas. It's something that I learned very early on, and he always stuck to what he was doing, and he always tried to make it better and to do whatever he could. You know, and it's common knowledge now. He says, you know, I probably got 25% of the movie that I wanted to shoot in Tunisia. But it didn't hurt the movie. You know, there's something about that first one that is special. There's something about it that connects to everybody in the world. And I think it's very important. And it is like a very ancient myth for the science fiction audience.
And how did you feel finally when the work was done? And when I say the work was done, obviously the work continues after production's done with post, but when it finally made it to the big screen and for the most part got a pretty good reaction, how did you feel? Of course, an Oscar followed for yourself. How did it feel? The relief.
It was a redemption, and it was what I thought. I was watching what I'd imagined would come, you know. And I was in the audience the first screening, which was crew and cast and a few people in London, and I watched that buzz when that ship came overhead. The entire audience stood up, and I mean, just gasped. And even I did myself. You went into another world. Palatable kind of relief for me that this, what I had slaved so hard for and believed in and supported, and with John Barry, that it actually had worked.
Going back to all of those original props, objects, weapons, this might be asking you to name your favorite or to choose your favorite child here, but do you have a favorite? I mean, there's so many iconics that we could talk about. R2-D2, the Falcon that you've mentioned before, Luke's binoculars, the lightsaber, of course. Can you choose a favorite child out of all of those and the ones I haven't mentioned?
I'm very fond of Han Solo's blaster. I have the reproduction of that, which I love. It's a beautiful object in itself. Of course, the lightsaber. It's, you know, my favorite growing up was King Arthur. I lived in King Arthur. I had Excaliburs, and I loved Excalibur. And I knew when I had to find something that would justify a weapon of the Jedi, is that Excalibur was high in my kind of research. That the lightsaber itself, when I found it, I just knew was such a beautiful object. They were my favorites, but I do relish the hold area of the Millennium Falcon. I believe was the first set I really, really got right. And it was the first time that I really had to exercise my idea that this airplane scrap would work. And I was throwing it in and teaching my prop boys how to line it up. And I'd gone in submarines and had a look, and bombers, and I knew that there had to be duplicates. And I've seen many times people just stick bits and pieces on walls. It doesn't work. It has to look engineered. So, and it took weeks and it looked terrible. And I kept doing and adding and more and thought it'll be all right. It'll be okay in my faith. And then when it emerged, I just saw people's faces when they walked around the set. They were like almost speechless, going, wow, this looks like you've got a ship and we've really done it. We've really made one. And of course it led to Alien, because that was the inspiration for the Nostromo interior, which I had to handle all of that for Ridley, and it worked. So I think that's probably my favorite, when I watch it and look at it and think, wow, this is such a cool interior.
Which was the least favorite child? Maybe the most challenging to create, that still gives you nightmares to this day?
I mean, but it worked. That's the thing. It did work. The most challenging was the crashed spaceship outside the cantina. And there's a purpose for that. John Barry found that set and it was perfect. Huge sandy square, and there were these domes on the top of these strange buildings, and he added some more on and I added stuff in. But there was a massive olive tree standing right there where they had to walk into the cantina. It just spoiled. It wasn't sci-fi. So John Barry sketched out a Boeing 747 size spaceship crashed. And I thought, well, I got to make this now. And my instinct kicked in, and I always followed it because I had no time to think. That we'd found a fact forming machine and made fact form panels that we stuck on with staples to make the Death Star interiors. It was a cheap way of doing it. I grabbed huge handfuls of those sheets and threw them on the truck, and they said, what are you doing? You're mad, and I was grabbing scrap metal, putting them on trucks to take to Tunisia. What are you doing, boy? I mean, you're going to Tunisia. And I said, yeah, there's no scrap there. Everything's used. And so I had to get up on my own on a ladder and stick these things on. I got a blowtorch and burnt them down and got that. In the end, no one notices it. It's just there as part of the landscape. But again, look what's happened. Every single Star Wars since has crashed spaceships. It became a symbol of the kind of Star Wars world.
Look out for more from my chat with Roger Christian, including his long collaboration with George Lucas, directing the second unit on Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace. Goodbye.